All right, so my topic is artificial intelligence and St. Augustine's just war theory, ethical problems, potential outcomes, which is a pretty big topic. It's a topic I've been working on lately, obviously, with the explosion of artificial intelligence and how it is being used in the U.S. military and now in other militaries. So, all right, we are experiencing right now an unregulated artificial intelligence arms race, as it's being called. The promise, of course, of AI that companies are giving us, or they're attempting to make warfare smarter, cheaper, and faster by incorporating artificial intelligence on the battlefield. So this includes things like AI-powered training sessions, making soldiers, sailors, and airmen combat ready through unconventional means. This is especially important for pilots who are working with virtual reality flight simulators. So these are already being used in the U.S. Air Force as well as the Royal Air Force. Pilots are being adjudicated by these AI programs on their performance. And in this case, it's an educational tool, these AI programs. So AI is also being used to train the pilots to make them much more effective once they're in the air. But ultimately, what they're hoping to see is that pilots be replaced by AI, by computers. The US, the EU, China, and Russia are all among those who are in this arms race to develop the most sophisticated AI weapons and training systems. And this is a way of trying to, at least for the China and Russia, this is a way of challenging the rules-based order that we're currently seeing and under lots of strain right now. Because what these, especially China and Russia, are trying to push forward is a new form of multipolarity. If you look at a lot of what's going on in Russia and the discussions in Russia, the kind of multipolarity that they're talking about is a return to an age of empires, so to turn the clock backward. So unipolarity was bad enough, they were saying multipolarity is the only way to overcome the problems of unipolarity. Now, according to U.S. General Mark Milley, who recently retired, he was the former Joint Chiefs of Staff in the U.S. military. To quote him, he says, "The maintenance of the international order is dependent on the U.S. and other Western nations to remain ahead of the development of AI, especially as it relates to weapons." So in this case, AI is a way of maintaining the global world order that we're currently living in and to push back the attempts to undo that order and return to an age of empires. Now, AI is especially important in what's called the OODA loop. The OODA loop was developed by the U.S. military as a way of dealing with the adversary on the battlefield. It's now been used in corporations and businesses, as well as things like athletic teams. So what the OODA loop essentially is observe, orient, decide, and act. It's used as a rapid, as I said, adaptive decision-making in dynamic environments with the goal of outmaneuvering opponents to complete the OODA loop faster than they can. So every time you're on the battlefield, we're all essentially doing the OODA loop, which is we're observing the enemy, their movements, things that they're changing on the battlefield, how they're adapting to the battlefield. Orient, this means that you are looking at where you are on the battlefield, what your resources are in relation to them, and then deciding how you're going to act according to their movements and their resources and the changes on the battlefield, and then the actual action of it. Whoever can close this OODA loop fastest, go through the whole process, has an overwhelming advantage on the battlefield. And as Mark Milley said, AI allows you to absorb vast amounts of complex information very rapidly to assist humans in their decision making. Theoretically, you can program the computers to make the decisions themselves, which would be a whole new world. And so AI has the promise of closing this OODA loop, or doing it much more faster than humans are. AI making such autonomous decisions that Mark Milley is talking about, them doing it themselves, closes the OODA loop even faster, much more substantially, and thus making mass killing on the battlefield more efficient. This is especially true when there is a significant differential military capacity between combatants. you have to think about, if you have two sides of opposing conflict, one has AI and the most sophisticated military equipment you have, and the other one does not. Closing the OODA loop makes killing that enemy or neutralizing the enemy all the more efficient, all the more quicker, all the more devastating. So one such case where we see this closing of the OODA loop through AI is, of course, through the conflict that we're witnessing right now between Israel and the Palestinians. So General Milley's whole new world, as he was talking about, of AI war has definitely arrived. It was discovered just recently that Israel is utilizing AI in its war on Gaza. This isn't anything new, the use of AI in Israel. There's lots of historical examples of that, including the Iron Dome that everyone hears about. So when the Iranians are launching missiles into Israel, the Iron Dome missile defense system is oftentimes intercepting those missiles. What they call SMASH, or Palestinian Facebook. Palestinian Facebook it's a euphemism for the observation and the surveillance of Palestinians through checkpoints and things like this, where there's a constant collection of data, biometric data, where they're at, who they are. It's all fed into AI, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more. In many ways, AI is assisted, of course, in the occupation and what can be rightfully called, in my estimation, the apartheid in Israel. This is part of the Palestinian Facebook process of keeping tabs on Palestinians, where they are, who they are, likelihood of them being part of Hamas or not. In its war on Gaza, AI has assisted in what the International Court of Justice, and now just this week, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, have now described as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. So we are looking at the first AI-assisted genocide, first artificial intelligence-assisted genocide. So how is this done more so than just smash the Iron Dome and Palestinian Facebook? This is called the Lavender System. The Lavender System is Israel's artificial intelligence system that's responsible for directing its attacks on Gaza. And we've all seen the mass devastation of Gaza. I come from a military family, studied war for decades now, and this looks worse than anything I've ever seen, other than maybe the saturation bombings of Europe during World War II. So how this AI targeting system that Israel used, Lavender, how it works is essentially there's two AI programs, two systems. One's called Alchemist and the other one's called Fire Factory. Alchemist brings in, essentially collects raw data about Palestinians, where they are, who their families are, where they live, who they associate with, likelihood of them being in Hamas or Hamas sympathizers. That's all just raw data. Alchemist feeds that into Fire Factory. Fire Factory refines it, right? It takes out a lot of the mistakes. It categorizes the information that's coming out of the raw data of Alchemist, and it feeds it into another AI system called Gospel. Of course, why it's called Gospel, I'm not sure. It seems pretty perverse to me, but nevertheless, it's called Gospel. And Gospel creates from that data 4 categories: the tactical targets, the underground targets, family homes, and power targets. In addition to creating these 4 categories, it also suggests which munitions to use, which munitions would be the most effective, whether it be a JDAM bomb, or 2,000-pound bomb, or a 2,000-pound bunker bombster, as they're called, or the BLU 109 or the Mark 84. These are also 2 munitions that the U.S. sends to Israel. What would cause the most amount of damage and neutralize whoever it is they are targeting? So Gospel produces these target lists and then suggests which munitions would be best to hit them with. Lavender, after Gospel feeds into Lavender, Lavender identifies who the system believes is Hamas or Islamic Jihad targets. Now, you have to remember that Israel's definition of who is Hamas and who is Islamic Jihad is very, very broad. All one has to do is listen to Israeli spokesmen on any of the news channels that you're watching in Britain, here in the U.S., and it seems like every Palestinian is somehow connected to Hamas and Islamic Jihad in some way, and therefore a legitimate target. Uh, just last week, information was leaked to the Israeli press that the intelligence in Israel is approximating 83% of those who have been killed in the war in Gaza have been civilians. And again, these are people who are being targeted by artificial intelligence, right? So you have to ask yourself the question: is Gaza a test lab for AI weapons? It's a just very disturbing question to ask, but it's one I think is completely legitimate when you're asking what's going on here. Why would 83% of targets be civilians, especially in relation to the fact that that Israel has the capacity to hit very specific and precise targets, as you saw in Lebanon in the last couple months, where there were leaderships of Hezbollah, for instance, or in Iran with the Guard there, and they're able to hit them very specifically. But here in Gaza, it seems more like a saturation bombing. So, according to the investigative journalist in Israel, the 972 Plus magazine, the destruction of Gaza is being also marketed as effectiveness of Israel's AI weapons for their defense industry. So this is a proof of concept, a proof of effectiveness campaign in many ways for the defense industry, the AI defense industry in Israel as well. And according to Michael Moore, the CEO of Israel Smart Shooter, to quote him talking about what's going on in Gaza and the use of AI, this is the finest hour of the defense industry. Now, when we look at the subject this to the 7-point just war theory of St. Augustine, we have to deal with a few things. Number one, we have to realize that, you know, for Catholic teachings aren't necessarily normative for anyone else other than Catholics, right? I mean, we can translate this religious verbiage, the religious semantics and semiotics, into post-secular, post-metaphysical language, so it can enter into the, you know, secular domain of the society's discourse, and we can debate these things. But if it's articulated completely in Catholic terms, it's not going to do anything for people outside of the Catholic community. So we have to remember that when we do that. And so that's what I'm attempting to do, is to take St. Augustine's, the initiation of the just war theory, and translate it into post-metaphysical language so it can enter into that discourse community of secular governments. And therefore, Israel itself would be subject to the ethical judgment of the 7-point just war theory. So if we look at starting with the first one, the just cause, Augustine insists that war is only justified if it corrects a grave wrong, such as defending against aggression or protecting the innocent. The problem with the use of AI in this first of the 7 points is that AI-driven weapons may launch attacks without sufficient contextual understanding of what constitutes a grave wrong. Right? What a grave wrong is dependent on judgment, and it's a judgment that AI generally does not have. So machine learning models, which is what we're dealing with in Israel, they cannot interpret moral intent, meaning they may target combatants and civilians indiscriminately, and it's much of what we're seeing. Without reliable discernment, the cause of war risked being corrupted into mere efficiency of killing. So you think the cause of the war, if we take it, you know, the Israeli narrative that the Palestinians attacked on October 7th, and therefore that's what's causing this retaliation. Obviously, it's not going to justify the mass murder of civilians up to 70-75% is what I keep hearing, of women and children. That can't be justified by saying we have to attack Hamas in some sort of retaliation, some kind of lex talionis, and therefore all Palestinians are being subject to, in this case, according to the International Court of Justice, to extermination in the Gaza Strip. And that cause is not a just cause by any stretch of the imagination. If we look at legitimate authority, only duly constituted political authorities may declare war. The problem with the AI is that delegating life and death decisions to autonomous systems undermines the sovereignty of legitimate authority. If machines can make targeting decisions independently, authority shifts from present human authority to algorithms. Algorithms become the authority by which individuals are targeted for assassination, for killing. This risks, of course, eroding political accountability as responsibility for killing becomes diffuse or untraceable. All right, and this is when we say that AI has no soul to damn and no body to incarcerate. Right? It simply doesn't. So if it's making these decisions autonomously, it undermines the authority who should be held responsible. This can you can get around this through international law. Obviously, there's an international arrest warrant out for Netanyahu for crimes against humanity. But those who are operating AI systems and doing the targeting and approving the targeting of certain Palestinians, oftentimes men, women, and children, as we saw last week, a group of journalists, and that's gone on. That, of course, can always be attributed to malfunctioning or the misappropriation and misuse of AI. So, dealing with right intention, the third point. The aim of war should be to promote peace and justice, not conquest or revenge. Right? That's the right intention of a war. The problem, of course, with AI is autonomous systems lack intention altogether. Right? They can only execute commands based on programmed objectives, not moral reasoning. If war is conducted largely by machines, which is what General Milley was talking about when he said that upwards to a third of the military, U.S. military and other Western militaries, is going to be machine and AI driven within 10 to 15 years. So if war is conducted largely by these machines, the human dimension of moral restraint disappears, replacing intention with mere operational outcomes. This undermines the very possibility of right intention in combat. Genocide, as we know, can never be a legitimate intention, nor marketing of weapons for the international weapons industry can never be an illegitimate, will always be an illegitimate intention if that is what this is partially for. In terms of last resort, all peaceful alternatives must be exhausted before resorting to war. The problem with AI, of course, is that because AI promises faster, cheaper, and more efficient combat, leaders may be tempted to wage war more quickly, bypassing diplomacy. If military forces become low cost in human terms, right, fewer soldiers die on the battlefield, the psychological and political barriers of war weaken, making it less likely that war will remain a last resort. Because if you're only risking the destruction of machines, and you're not risking the loss of human life, are you more inclined to go to war and then less inclined to go to war? Right? That's the whole issue, one of the issues of last resort. Now, the probability of success. There must be a reasonable chance of success to justify the suffering caused by war. Problem with AI, of course, is that complex autonomous systems are vulnerable to hacking, manipulation, and unforeseen errors. I remember in the Obama administration, they were flying a Reaper drone over Iran, and the Iranians simply hacked it and landed it. Right? I mean, it was unbelievable. They hacked a Reaper drone and landed it, and President Obama said he would like to have it back, and the Iranians said no way, and they most likely sold it off to the highest bidder. But these type of autonomous machines, in many cases, are subject to the same type of hacking and manipulation and unforeseen errors. An adversary could easily exploit these vulnerabilities, turning AI weapons against their users. Instead of increasing success, AI risks catastrophic failure and escalation, making success less probable and instability more likely. Sixth, proportionality. The violence used must be proportional to the injury suffered. The problem, of course, with AI is that AI-driven weapons, especially autonomous drones with the new kind of swarms that we're bringing onto the battlefield, and targeting systems can unleash disproportionate force with minimum human oversight. Because algorithms maximize efficiency rather than justice, they may escalate violence beyond proportion, inflicting far more destruction than the wrong that provoked war. And we can certainly see this disproportionality in this current war between Israel and Palestine. Last of them is discrimination. Non-combatants must never be deliberately targeted. And the problem with the use of AI and coming to discrimination is that current AI technologies cannot reliably distinguish combatants from civilians, especially in irregular warfare where adversaries blend into civilian populations. Misidentification by an autonomous weapon could result in mass civilian casualties, violating the most fundamental moral principles of just war. We also have to think about this, is that if you are bound to, let's say the U.S. military is bound to the UCMJ, the Universal Code of Military Justice, there are certain things you cannot do. You have international law, you have the Geneva Conventions, you have the Hague Conventions, the non-torture conventions, on and on and on, all these conventions. So if you're trying to hold on to these things and using AI, these are problems for you, the 7-point just war theory, because it's showing the possibility of violating those very conventions, international laws, and the UCMJ. It's a warning that you might not be able to hold on to your just war that you've prepared for through all these forms of legislation. However, if you're trying to engage in a genocide, if you are trying to wipe out the population that you're in a conflict with, these 7-point just war theory, 7-point just war theory is not really a restraint, because AI is allowing you to kill and kill quicker and efficient and more cost effectively on a much more faster scale, on a much more bigger scale, on a scale that has been unforeseen in the modern period. And thus, we have to think about everything that would hold back AI is unleashed if you're attempting to engage in a genocide. All the attempts to restrain its capacity to be a means to mass murder is unleashed when you're attempting to commit genocide. And so therefore, AI used in the right way possibly can possibly reduce some kind of mass casualty events, things like that, of civilians. It has that capacity to help in that, but turn the other direction, it has the capacity to further genocide and make it done a whole lot faster. So in conclusion, St. Augustine's just war theory requires human moral reasoning at every stage of conflict, determining cause, the authority, intention, proportionality, and discrimination. AI, by its nature, lacks moral agency and undermines human responsibility. And if you have a tool that powerful, that lacks moral agency, and you put it in the hands of leaders who lack moral agency or have very ill intentions, we're looking at a whole nother kind of warfare, much more devastating than we've known. Thus, its deployment on the battlefield risks rendering wars completely unjust, unaccountable, and morally catastrophic.